We'll be recording, and assuming that my upcoming week is not as busy as my last week, which I think is going to be true, we'll get all these videos up on the website. So voices are going to be recorded, but faces are not. So just a disclaimer there. All right, so today what we're going to do is this is going to be a much more, even more kind of text-heavy day than last week was. So what we're really going to be doing now is using the tools in the toolbox to kind of look at what is this historical background, what are some of these other pieces, with an eye towards how might these things actually be interpreted in a way that's useful to us today. So we're going to be kind of vaguely looking forward. We're going to, again, it's going to be still mostly vaguely looking forward, and we'll kind of wrap all these pieces up when we come to the end. Oh, hey. Oh my gosh, this is great. We've run out of chairs. Oh, there's one more chair over there. No, yeah, go right ahead and take that. There's just one more chair. We just need to pile in. Oh, that's a good idea. So just, I want to kind of, oh, yeah, do we need a moment or so? Oh, good. So just want to remind ourselves kind of where we are in the rhetorical structure. So one of the models that we're looking at for the way that the kind of narrative structure of Revelation is organized is with this sort of hinge that we begin with a kind of an epistolary framework, a letter framework. We move into descriptions of the particular environments and circumstances associated with the seven cities. And then we get into a series of things that echo aspects of the Old Testament and prophecies. And then we come to sort of a hinge point. Shishler Ferianza sees the sort of the key point here as the bittersweet scroll, which we're actually not going to talk about a lot today. But this is where we get into, what is the quote unquote war on the community? What are they in fact resisting? And then we kind of move out of that. We can see the kind of the mirror on the other end of the hinge, where we come back to a series of prophetic plagues, with a kind of now a key focus on what's going on with this image of Babylon. And then we come out into the kind of ends of things with the revelation of the New Jerusalem. So you have the city imagery mirroring the seven cities, and then finally closing with, again, the epistolary framework. So to the first part today, we're going to focus here on the hinge, the middle point. So what exactly is the problem? That's what we're going to dig into today, plus a little bit of the next section, the Exodus from oppression. Just want to remind us of the kind of the message of Revelation. We got to this at the end of last week when we looked at what was the themes that emerged out of the letters to the churches. And we have this theme of wherever you are, whatever you're suffering, we are called to repent, return to the Lord, and hold on to Jesus Christ with faithful endurance. So we're going to see this theme really, really come to the fore as we look at this hinge point. So we're going to start with the image of the woman crowned with the stars and the beasts. So we did a little bit of the woman crowned with the stars a few weeks ago when we looked at the different types of imagery that John has access to. And we talked about, just to refresh our memories, how there are a lot of echoes of Near Eastern religious practices, and also echoes of particularly the story of Leto, Artemis, and Aphrodite. So we're going to get into that again. But what we're going to do, the way we're going to do this is sort of we're finally getting kind of the way that I really wanted to do this, which is to listen to the passage. And then we'll look at the text and kind of see what's going on. So we'll start here. With 4.
A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman robed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was with child, and she cried out in her pangs of birth, in anguish to be delivered. Then a second sign appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. And his tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and hurled them toward the earth. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when her child was born, he might devour it. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is destined to rule all nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert, where she had a place prepared by God, that there she might be sustained for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, and he did not prevail. Nor had they any place any more in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called Devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaim, "Now is the salvation and power and sovereignty of our God, and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters is driven out. He who accused them day and night before our God, they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the testimony they bore. For love of life did not bring them to shrink from death. Rejoice, then, you heavens, and you that dwell in them. But woe to you, earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great fury, knowing that his time is short."
Okay, so this is a passage that we've kind of looked at, or at least pieces of this, and some of this I think we can actually go fairly quickly, because again, we've got all the tools that we need. So we'll actually be able to sort of really kind of focus on some pieces. In some respects, the parts that are going to become more interesting for us are the parts that are not in bold. So not the stuff that's kind of the place where he's stitching, or what he's gathering from, but actually how he's choosing to stitch them together. So let's just go through this really quickly. We've got the sign appears in heaven. Heaven is the place of perfection. It's the place where God is. We also know that this is reinforced because we've got a sun and a moon and the stars, and we know that in our cosmology of the time, this is all part of the perfect space. So this image of the woman crowned with stars, with the moon at her feet, later becomes an image that's very much associated with the Virgin Mary. And that would make sense because she's about to give birth. But that's probably not who John's talking about. In fact, not even probably, John's not using that image. It's actually a little bit weirder and a little bit more complicated. For John, this is an image of the church. And part of the reason why we know is because she's got 12 stars, and we know what 12 means. 12 means Israel. So we were coming into all this space. So then we get a red dragon. Again, we've got all the tools in the toolbox. I'll start even asking questions. Dragon, that's a bad thing, right? We know that. What does red mean? Red means blood, violence. It's bloody, violent dragon. We know this. 7 heads. Heads are manifestations, people, it's a category of things. We've got 7 things. We're going to find out more about those things later. 10 horns, lots of power. 7 diadems, lots of ability to command. So then we get to this interesting bit. So he sweeps down a third of the stars of heaven. Is this the second third that we've lost, I think, at this point? So again, as I said last week, we can't try to add up how many stars because the wheel just keeps turning. Everything's all happening at the same time. It's all sort of the same thing, but it's not. So the dragon stands before the woman who's about to give birth. This is very much an echo of the story of Python and Apollo and Artemis, so that the child might be born to devour it. Gives birth to a male child who is destined to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Now we're getting other echoes of the Old Testament, particularly the Psalms. This is clearly the Son of Man / God kind of coming in. But her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. And the throne, again, is the image of governance and power. The woman flees into the desert. So those of you who are familiar with godly play know that the desert is a dangerous place, which is very true. The desert is also the place where the people of God encounter God. And the fact that this woman is fleeing to the desert, our ears should start pricking up. We just heard about a whole bunch of plagues earlier. Now they're in the desert. There's a serious Exodus theme beginning to really come into play here. And it's going to come into sharp focus in just a few chapters. So she has a place prepared by God for there where she might be sustained for 1,260 days. So I went ahead and did the math for you. That's 2.5 years. So what that means, if we go back, we're going all the way back to the book of Daniel. We talked about how John is very heavily reliant on these earlier apocalyptic texts. The book of Daniel describes the time of tribulation, the time when the evil king is in control of Jerusalem, as a time, another time, and half a time. So it's 2.5 years. It's all the same amount. Okay. Now, part of why I think this next bit is actually really interesting and significant, you'll notice there's not a whole lot in here. In fact, there's nothing in here that's bolded. So this is actually now a bit of a passage that's basically a new composition for John. So this is him kind of beginning to, again, we're right in the middle here. So he's set the entire metaphoric worldview within which we're operating, and now we're starting to play with this stuff. So there's one really key piece, and it's actually right here at the very beginning. And this line, I hadn't appreciated this even remotely until we started doing this work. Then war broke out in heaven. War is bad. War is disorderly. War is, people die. It's terrible. Everyone knows this. It breaks out in heaven. Well, that can't happen because heaven is the place of God's order. And this is a really, really problematic line, because it means that all of the rest of what's going to happen somehow flows out of God's order. So this is the kind of the most unsettling aspect of, like, God's got a plan. So and I pastorally, I hear this all the time, and I'm always like, well, yes, but God doesn't want you to have cancer. Like, you don't think that, like, that's all part of God's plan. That could just be a terrible thing. So what it makes sense within the worldview that John has created, but it is a really dangerous and really unsettling idea. And we'll see more of this next week when we look at the ends of things. So we have Michael and the angels fighting against the dragon. I could have highlighted this stuff. We're back to our old friend Enoch. This is very similar to other kind of pieces of work where the various archangels are tasked with beating up the bad angels. So the dragon's angels fight back. There was no place for them left in heaven, so now they're cast down to the earth. So there's also something interesting that we're seeing here. And this is, I think, all further evidence of John being a really, really well-read and well-educated person, well-educated in the Judean tradition, because he clearly understands that the Satan has an aspect of being the accuser. But there's also this overlaid, what's emerging as the idea of the personification of evil, or the embodiment of evil in the form of the devil or Satan. So he recognizes that he's got a problem, that there's two different images of what Satan is, and he's kind of squashed them together. And what the kind of rhetorical trick that he does here is, while the devil was in heaven, the devil was operating as the accuser, as a member of the heavenly court, the kind of chief prosecutor. But he went too far and was problematic. And now that he's being cast down, he becomes the embodiment of evil. It doesn't actually work, but you can see he's trying to make it work. Then we get this loud voice from heaven. Now is the salvation and power and sovereignty of our God. I've really been struggling. To sorry about that. I think when we look at words like salvation, well, salvation's an easy one for us because we think of that word, and when we use it in contemporary English or use it in church circles, it's a God talk word. It's a spiritual word. In antiquity, it might not have always had that. It would have had other kinds of overtones as well. That salvation could kind of mean rescuing. But then we also get power and sovereignty. And I mean, power in particular, I think when we say the word power in church, because of our post-Reformation, post-Enlightenment world that we live in, we've been taught that there's the spiritual stuff and then there's the other stuff. And and part of the reason why I feel comfortable saying that we all do this is because I certainly do this, and I would be shocked if most of you don't do this as well. We implicitly add the word spiritual. So when we hear, now is the salvation and spiritual power and spiritual sovereignty of our God and the spiritual authority of his Christ. And then we can carve out this other world where there's temporal power and temporal authority and temporal sovereignty. And it's good and appropriate that kings and presidents and congresses wield that power. But in the worldview that John is working with, the spiritual is tied to the temporal and the temporal to the spiritual. And that in the balance of things, the spiritual may actually be a little bit more important. But they affect each other. And they affect each other, because the dragon has come down to earth, and woe to us. So as much as we can, we have to try to get over that. I don't even know if we can get over that bifurcation that we have in our minds, because John is not talking about spiritual power or spiritual sovereignty. John is talking about all of it, spiritual and temporal, everything. And that makes things really, really complicated, especially as we move into the really kind of bloodthirsty pieces that we're going to get to next week. Then you get again, we're full into the paradox and the metaphor here. They have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. Lambs don't conquer, blood doesn't conquer anything. That's not how any of this works. It only works here in this text. Okay, let's move on to the next bit here. Oh, actually, I don't actually have a, we don't have a reading for this one. It's just a great picture, so I wanted to add it. Okay. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he went in pursuit of the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 great eagle's wings so that she could fly to her place in the desert where she was sustained for a time, times, and half a time away from the serpent. Interesting that we've now moved from dragon to serpent, right? And the serpent, of course, bringing back the echoes from Genesis. The serpent spewed a flood of water after the woman to sweep her away in its flood. Now we got a flood. This is amazing. But the earth came to the assistance of the woman and opened its mouth and swallowed the river which the dragon had spewed from his mouth. So the dragon was furious with the woman and went off to wage war on the rest of her offspring. And who are the rest of those offspring? Those who keep God's commandments and have the testimony of Jesus. And he, that is the dragon, took his stand on the seashore. This is how we know that the woman crowned with the stars is not the Virgin Mary, because we are not exactly the Virgin Mary's offspring. But clearly this is a reference to the rest of the church. The rest of the church. Any questions or comments before I go any further? Here, get this for you.
What language was John writing in?
John's writing in Greek.
So, angel just means messenger then.
Yes, but messenger, certainly by this point, we're talking about a messenger of God who looks weird. Yeah, I mean, they're not necessarily described. They're not. As all these various angels, we're going to get a lot of angels too, and we've skipped over even more angels. They don't necessarily have wings. They don't necessarily have whatever, but they are clearly kind of members of the divine court, the heavenly court.
Okay.
So Stephanie had a question. Let's see if we can get that back to her. See if we can pass that back.
Thanks. It was a question on the imagery of the previous illustration of the woman with all the, with the dragon. There's like a house. Is that a church? And what's coming out of it? The first thing that hit my mind was possibly gold
this one?
blocks, gold bullion. Is that what it is? And does that mean anything?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure what that is. I suspect it's a crib, because the infant child, the male child, was taken up into heaven. So I think it's probably looks like a crib to me.
Okay.
But that's an image of the that's heaven. So we're taken up into heaven. And this one's great too, because the dragon's spitting the water out and the earth is blocking it. So good. If I remember correctly, this is a early 11th century set of illustrations. And she's got her wings. That's awesome. Caroline? Oh, let's see if we can get that.
Sorry. If the boy's not Jesus, who's the boy?
The boy is Jesus.
Oh, the boy is Jesus.
Absolutely, the boy is Jesus.
Even though she's not Mary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here we go.
Then out of the sea I saw a beast rising, with 10 horns and 7 heads. On its horns were 10 diadems, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw was like a leopard, but its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth like a lion's mouth. The dragon conferred on it its own power, his throne, and great authority. One of its heads was wounded, as it seemed, unto death, yet its mortal wound was healed, and the whole world gazed with wonder at the beast. They worshipped the dragon because he had conferred his authority on the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" It was allowed to mouth boasts and blasphemy, and it was given permission to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth in blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was allowed to wage war on God's people and conquer them, and it was given authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, all whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain since the foundation of the world. If you have ears, hear then. Whoever is for captivity, to captivity he goes. Whoever is slain by the sword he must be slain. This calls for the endurance and faith of God's people. Then I saw another beast rising out of the land. It had 2 horns, like a lamb's, but it spoke like a dragon. It wielded all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and it made the earth and all its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It worked great miracles, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of the people. By the miracles it was allowed to perform in the presence of the beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth, telling the inhabitants of the earth to set up an image of the beast which has received the sword wound and yet lived. It was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and to cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. It caused everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to have a mark put on his right hand or on the forehead, and no one was allowed to buy or sell unless one had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone who has intelligence figure out the number of the beast, for it is the number of a human being, and its number is 666.
Giving anything away when I say Richard was very excited about this passage. This was a fun one for him. Okay, we've done a few of these things we've done before. I apologize, I got that wrong. It's 3.5 years is the time of tribulation. So we saw this bit about the beast. Use this as an example of how the secret decoder ring works. So again, we know how this is. So we've got the dragon standing on the seashore, effectively calling out the beast from the sea. The sea, the place of primordial chaos, the place that sort of in opposition to the order of God. We've got a beast, which is sort of an agent of chaos and disorder. Got lots of power, got 10 horns, got 7 heads, and then 10 diadems. So again, and then it's got a blasphemous name. So it carries with it power that tries to take away God's glory. And then we get a description of the beast. If I remember correctly, there's this leopard and bear and lion imagery is also pulling from images from Daniel. It's not exactly the same as the beasts in Daniel, but again, there's echoes that these kind of pulling on these strands. So the dragon passes on his own power, and then again, because John. So I want to back up just 1 second. Want to really, really stick within what John is doing, because there's some very odd things that are about to pop up. So he often just stops and tells us what's going on here. So he confers on it his power, his thrones, and now we can remember that thrones are allied with power and great authority. Now, if we didn't already know the story of Nero, Redivivus, the story of the resurrected Nero, this next bit would make absolutely no sense at all. One of its heads was wounded. It seemed unto death, yet its mortal wound was healed. And the whole world gazed with wonder. So yeah, what is this? That's the Nero story coming back in. We're going to get, there's a lot of Nero about to come up. The world gazes with wonder at the beast they worship because he had conferred his power. Who is like the beast? This is a blasphemous echo of comments from the Old Testament. Who is like God? Who could be like God? And yet the people of the earth are saying, who is like the beast? And the beast itself is not the full problem. The real problem is the dragon, right? The dragon brings forth the beast. And then you get, just to stay really focused on John's words, it was allowed. So he uses a passive construction. So who is the one allowing the beast to do this? And the answer is, it has to be God. That's why this is really, we are right on the edge of seriously problematic stuff. So he mouths boasts and blasphemies, given permission to authority to work to exercise authority for 42 months. It opens its mouth in blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling. That is, those who dwell in heaven. This is also interesting. So now we're beginning to slide between heaven being a place and heaven being people. It was allowed to wage war on God's people. I think the reason why this frame still kind of works for the people who are hearing this is if we think back to all the stuff we've worked on, sort of the historical circumstance for the people that are hearing this, they're not exactly under oppression, but they feel like they're under oppression. They feel like they're being squeezed from other Christians. They feel like they're being squeezed by the Roman Empire. And so this whole thing is about, why is this happening? What is the outcome? What is God doing with this stuff? And so they're able to sort of draw a sense of comfort from the idea that for as bad as this is, God's still in charge. I think that's probably the most sort of charitable and safest way. So it was allowed to wage war on God's people and conquer them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation. And then here we have sort of we have a superlative. All the inhabitants. Of course, we know that's not true. There's at least 144,000 / uncountable who are not, but all the inhabitants will worship it. All those whose names had not been written in the book of life of the Lamb. I would love to be able to get into the book of life bit. That's another giant. So you probably have to do 2 separate classes on what's going on with that, which we won't have time for. Okay, and then here we have this really interesting little bit. This happens twice in this passage. He's deep, deep in the narrative. And remember, let's go all the way back to section A. What is this thing that we're hearing? It's the revelation of God given to Jesus, given to the angel, given to John, given to the reader to read to the angel of the church, or maybe something like that. So we've got all these layers. And so now we have, remember, we're just a moment ago, we've got dragons on seashores, we've got stars being swept down, and then the reader pulls up and says, if you have ears, talking directly to the hearer, whoever is for captivity, to captivity he goes. Whoever is to be slain by the sword he must go. This calls for the endurance and faith of God's people. We're all the way back to those messages that we got from the 7 churches. Right here in the middle, right in the hinge, and when all the action's really getting going, pulls up and addresses us directly. Then I saw another beast rising out of the land. Okay, got to back up for just a second because I forgot a point. Seashore, the sea, primordial chaos. Is there a monster that lives in the sea? Anybody? Monster that lives in the sea? The Leviathan. Leviathan's got a counterpart, Behemoth. Behemoth comes from the land. So just pulling from all of these Old Testament and Judean traditions. Another beast rising out of the land. This one's puny. This is like the wimpiest creature we've met in this entire thing. He's only got 2 horns. Useless. But it spoke like a dragon, which is cool. So it wields all the authority of the first beast, but only in its presence. That's interesting. So this one is very limited. And it makes all the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. It's really, really key. Now, this is where I think things get super duper weird. It doesn't say that he's faking miracles. It doesn't say it was like miracles. It doesn't say doing magic even. It says it worked great miracles. And when you look at the examples, making fire come down from heaven. Well, we've seen that before. That was Elijah, or is Elisha who burns up the prophets of Baal? Does anybody remember? Thank you. Glad you're here. So Elisha, gets into the fight with the prophets of Baal, and they say, "Oh, bring down fire to burn the little cow," and they can't do it. And then he brings down so much fire that he not only burns up the cow, he burns up all of the prophets of Baal. Elisha usually overcorrects. So he does these miracles in the presence of the beast to deceive the inhabitants. But again, I'm not entirely sure they're deceived if these miracles are real. It's a very odd thing happening here. But he sets up an image of the beast who has received the sword wound and lived. So much Nero. I mean, can we please just calm it down with the Nero bit? Again, it was allowed I mean, look at this. This is astounding. To give breath to the image of the beast. So that the image of the beast, it doesn't even say, seems like it would speak, would even speak. This is incredible sort of power being given to these beasts. And again, by who? By God. So strange. It caused everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to have a mark put on his right hand or on their forehead. This is clearly a blasphemous kind of cross violation of the Jewish traditions of binding the law onto your forehead and onto your left arm. So it's the reverse. And whenever you want to sort of make it bad, you do the opposite version of it. And here's the piece that I think gets unbelievably strange. No one was allowed to buy or sell unless one had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. There is no evidence that Christians were shut out of economic activity. So we have to stick within this text itself and say, okay, John is making a statement about if you adhere to the beast, or if you reject the beast, you have to also reject everything about social and economic society. I'm sure you were all looking forward to this bit. Again, the reader in the church pulls up, addressing the congregation directly. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone who has intelligence figure out the number of the beast, for it is the number of a human being, and its number is 666. And anytime that you see this in Bibles or in other things, there will be a little asterisk, and then it'll say, some ancient sources record the number as 616. Anyone want to know what the number of the beast is? Of course you do. Here we go. Okay, so in antiquity, in less so in Latin, but in Hebrew and Greek, there were these practices. In Hebrew, they were a little bit more related to numerology. In Greek, they were sort of more math, but math/philosophy/spirituality. And it had to do with the fact that they didn't actually necessarily have, Arabic numbers are a completely different thing. That for almost every people, in the West at least, letters would have to stand in for numbers. And we see that with Roman numerals and that sort of thing. So there were different numbers that were assigned to different letters. When you look at the number 666, it's actually three Greek letters. But if you back it up, and this is why you have to have intelligence to do this, is because you have to know what the original name was in order to get the number out of it later. Well, it turns out, so in antiquity, people were always like, oh yeah, that's Nero. Everybody knows that that's Nero. And so then you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. And a couple of people said, no, it's not Nero, but pretty much everyone did. I think one of the earliest is Irenaeus, who's, I'm trying to remember, I think late 2nd century, early 3rd century. So very early on, people said, oh, we know what that is. Well, here's how it works. If you take the Greek word, so if you take how they would have spelled it in Hebrew and yet the Greek version of the Hebrew, this is tricky. It would have been noon, nu, rho, omicron, nu, so nron, and then Caesar, Caesar. That'd be kappa, sigma, rho. And then that comes into a series of Hebrew letters. And when you add that all up, guess what you get? 666. Ah, yeah. How terrible they are. We know with 666, it's so bad. It's so bad. 3 is a number of perfection, right? So it's perfectly bad. And 6 is a corruption of 7. 7 is perfection. and 6 is one less, so it's a mockery of perfection. It's perfect mockery of perfection. Nero is so bad. Always a Nero. And how do we know that it's Nero? Because if you do the same thing with the Latin version, you get 616, which is what the other ancient sources come up with. So it's Nero. But again, we know it's not Nero because Nero's already dead. And it's this weird legend of Nero who's not dead but isn't dead. And he's over in Parthia now, and he's going to come back with a big army, and it's going to be terrible, terrible, terrible. Again, just to kind of bring it back, Nero is ancient Christians' Hitler. Like there's always a Hitler, there's always a Nero, there's always an Attila the Hun, there's always a giant boogeyman out there who should be gone but is going to come back. Happens to be Nero. Okay. Oops. Got that. So we have these 3 beasts. What's going on with these beasts? By the way, there's another passage that we're not going to get to where the frogs come out of the mouths of the beast. That's why there's awesome little frogs on this manuscript page. It's just another plague, just echo of the Exodus plagues. Okay, so we got a red dragon. Red dragon comes, it came out of heaven, maybe was also the serpent that was chained in the abyss at one point. Remember, we've got that image of the spiral that sort of keeps circling back. So got a couple of different origin stories for this red dragon. It's got tons of crowns and heads and horns and all that sort of stuff. The dragon calls forth the first beast. Comes from the sea. It's the Leviathan. Also got crowns, 7 heads and horns, given its power from the dragon. So there's a movement of authority and power that goes from the dragon to the first beast. And then we got the second beast. Comes from the land. This is Behemoth. 2 puny little horns, and then causes people to worship the first beast. So what are these things? The first beast is cosmic evil. So this is that movement from the accuser down to earth. This is no longer a kind of an angel with a job to do, a difficult job to do. This is now fully transformed into the embodiment of cosmic evil. Cosmic evil calls forth the emperors or empire, calls forth, and then 3 is the imperial cult. The second beast causes the world to worship the first beast. So this is the mechanism by which people engage in the emperor worship. Just to kind of skip ahead, but give us sort of a foretaste of what we're going to do when we really look at how this plays out in today, I think we can actually abstract. We can take one step back from this particular set of images to see for just a moment why it might be practical for us today. Cosmic evil is cosmic evil. That's just a thing out there. That's nothing we can do about that. Well, God can. But we still have empire, but we might in turn instead call it structural evil in the world. And then instead of the imperial cult, we might describe the ways that we are drawn into that structural evil. So I think this actually, was it session 1? No, session 2. We talked about how apocalyptic literature is literature produced by a community to resist empire. And we talked about how there's 2 types of control that empire exerts on oppressed people. The first would be domination, the kind of active political and coercive violence to physically control people, threats to bodily harm. And then the second mechanism, which you described as hegemony, all of the non-violent mechanisms of control. So this particular description of the 3 beasts is a direct attack on the aspects of hegemony. So those that have the mark of the beast are the ones who are allowed to participate in social and commercial activity. And then the second beast is the one that invites people into an idolatrous religious practice. So it's another nonviolent way of creating coercive control. Okay, so now how does this sort of play out? Another angel, I love how he says helpfully a third. I think we've had like a couple hundred at this point. So, followed them and was saying in a loud voice, whoever worships the beast and its image and receives the mark on its forehead or hand shall, now here's the consequences of doing that, shall also drink the wine of wrath of God poured undiluted into the cup of his anger, and shall be tormented with fire and brimstone before the holy angels and before the Lamb. The smoke of their torment will go up forever and ever, and there will be no respite day or night for those who worship the beast and its image and whoever receives the mark of its name. This is terrible. We're deep into sort of bloodthirsty revelation. And again, the only way I think we can kind of hold on to what would be Christian messages of mercy, compassion, reconciliation, and hope is this next line. That all of this points to, hence, the endurance of God's people, those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. So, I think, at least for me, the way I'm sort of holding on to this is to say, we've got kind of the real people are Christians, and then there's these sort of straw figures who perform a kind of narrative function in order to inspire the Christians. So we might actually say, again, if we sort of insert some of the code that we know, and another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, whoever worships the emperor and his image and participates in idolatrous social and commercial activity shall also drink the wine of wrath. I don't know about you. I mean, I know I've got like they're not real people, and I'm the real Christian. I'm also starting to feel a little bit nervous. We'll get real nervous in session 8. Okay, I want to skip ahead to the image of the harlot on the beast. So we're actually moving now into the next section, where we've got a little bit more about kind of so we talked about what's the key problem. I think we've identified the key problem is, which mark do you have? I mean, it really seems like the world's been divided into the people with the mark of the Lamb or the other one. So now we're moving into what happens, what unfolds because of this. And we got another reading.
And one of the 7 angels who held the 7 bowls came and spoke to me. Come, he said, I will show you the verdict on the great harlot, enthroned on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have made themselves drunk on the wine of her fornication. He carried me away in spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman mounted on a scarlet beast, which was covered in blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and bedecked with gold and precious stones and pearls. In her hand she held a gold cup full of obscenities and the filth of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a mysterious name: Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of all obscenities on earth. I saw the woman was drunk on the blood of God's people and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. At the sight of her, I wondered greatly. Then the angel said to me, Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides with the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast you saw was and is not, and is to rise from the abyss, and it goes to perdition. The inhabitants of the earth, whose name have not been written in the book of life since the foundation of the world, will be astonished to behold the beast that was, and is not, and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads and the 7 hills on which the woman sits enthroned. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 now is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must stay for a short while. And the beast that was and is not is also an 8th. Yet he is one of the 7, and he goes to perdition. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom yet, but for 1 hour they are to receive royal authority with the beast. They have a single purpose and will yield their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called and chosen and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters you saw where the harlot sat enthroned are peoples and multitudes of nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw and the beast, they will come to hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked. They will devour flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their minds to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and by yielding their sovereignty to the beast until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that holds sway over the kings of the earth.
Okay, so a lot going on here, right? Way back, I think, fairly early on, I said that there are some folks who think that John wrote this way to sort of sneak it past the Roman censors, like some sort of World War II spy thriller. So the 7 heads are 7 hills. Do you think any Roman censor would have not known what he was talking about? Like the 7 hills of Rome. Like this is unbelievably obvious what he's going on here. So now we've got this beast. We're a couple chapters past where we were before. So it's like we've sort of pressed reset. So don't worry about those 3 beasts we talked about before. We got a new beast now. So what's the deal with this beast? This beast appears to be some sort of conflation of the dragon and the first beast. We can kind of guess that because what color is it? It's red. So dragon was red. This beast is red. I think mostly he didn't want her to ride on a dragon. That would have been weird. So he put it on a beast instead. Got 7 heads and 10 horns. That's the same number of heads and horns that both the beast and the dragon have. So, okay. She's got lots of money. How do we know she has lots of money? Because she's got purple, and she's got scarlet, she's got gold and precious stones. The filth of her fornications. Again, we're going back to this image of fornication being a word used primarily to describe idolatry and kind of going after false gods. Now, I love this. On her name was written a mysterious name. Oh, wait, I'm going to tell you the name. So it's not terribly mysterious at all. It's just right here. Name, again, the sort of location of its power. And the name of this one is Babylon the Great. Okay. So he's wondering greatly. Thankfully, there's someone there to explain everything. So Babylon is the city that sacks Jerusalem. So has anyone sacked Jerusalem in the last 25 years? Why, yes, they have. Who would that be? That would be Rome. So again, just incredibly transparent about what he's doing. Why do you wonder? I will tell you. The beast. Now here we get this really interesting construction. The beast you saw was and is not and is to rise. So we have a past, a present, and a future. But it's different because the middle bit, the present bit, is not. So there's a negative to it. So again, what we're seeing here is a mirror of the construction of how God describes God's self as the one who was and is to come, but it's the one who is and is not. So again, we have a mockery that's being produced. And I think it's really significant that it's the present tense, which is the negative, because the kind of deep sense of who God is simply the verb to be. So it's I am. So the one thing that this beast is not is I am. Then we again have this wonderful little moment. This calls for wisdom. Now again, this is it's very unclear who's talking at this point. Is this the angel who's saying this calls for wisdom? Is this the reader? Now again, addressing the audience, that it seems to be that's often kind of a code. But again, he's using the same constructions and doesn't seem to have the same sort of direct references to. So we get the 7 hills. So this is clearly Rome. Once again, we have another version of the story of Nero Redivivus. The beast that was and is not is also an 8th, but it's also one of the 7. So it's Nero. We're back to Nero. But now we have a new player on the board, which is interesting. We have 10 kings who have received no kingdom yet, but for a single hour, of course not an hour, but a period of time, a smaller period of time. And they will wage war on those who are called and chosen. And then the dramatic conclusion, faithful. So again, we have this long story about this crazy lady on this weirdo beast. And it's all leading up to war on the people. And what are we called to be? We are called to be faithful. Always back to this touchstone. Then he said to me, I think this is to me, this is really fascinating. The waters you saw, the harlot sat enthroned, are the peoples and the multitudes. Again, this is he's on Patmos. He's in the Mediterranean Sea. It's what did the Romans call it? Our sea, our lake. And they so a lot of this commercial activity is happening because of shipping trade. And famously, one of the great sort of things the Romans were able to achieve was the complete suppression of piracy. So it was safe to actually ship things. And that was what caused a massive economic boom. So, but these 10 kings, they will come to hate the harlot and will make her desolate and naked, and they will devour her flesh and burn her with fire. Eventually, empire consumes itself. I think to write something like that down feels very modern. I think it's astounding to see this insight as one that people have had a long time ago, and yet it's couched in this incredibly powerful poetic language. Okay, we got one more passage here.
After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was lighted up by his splendor. With a mighty voice he proclaimed, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean and loathsome bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich on the strength of her wanton luxury." Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you may have no part in her sins, and that you do not suffer her plagues, for her sins are piled high as heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Pay her back in her own coin. Repay her twice over for her works. In the cup she mixed, mix her a double draught. To match her pomp and wanton luxury, mete out to her torment and grief. She says to herself, I sit here as queen. No widow am I, no mourning I will see. Therefore, in a single day will her plagues come. Pestilence, mourning, and famine, and she will be burnt to the ground, for mighty is the God who has condemned her. The kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and lived wantonly with her will weep and wail over her as they watch the smoke of her burning. Standing far off in terror at her torment, they will say, Alas, alas, the great city, mighty city of Babylon, in 1 hour your doom has come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn her, because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold and silver, precious stone and pearls, fine linens and purples, silk and scarlet, all sorts of scented woods and every type of ivory work, and all kinds of objects of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon and spice, incense, myrrh, and frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses, chariots, slaves, and human livestock. The fruit of which your soul longed is gone from you, and all your luxuries and splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of these wares, who were made rich through her, will stand far off in terror at her torment, weeping and mourning, and saying, Alas, alas for the great city, that was robed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour, so much wealth was laid waste. Then every sea captain and seafarer, sailors and those who make a living from the sea stood far off and cried out as they watched the smoke of her burning. Was there ever a city like the great city? They threw dust on their heads and cried out, wailing and mourning, saying, Alas, alas for the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich from her wealth. In 1 hour so much wealth was laid waste. Rejoice over her, heaven, and God's people, and apostles, and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her.
All right, again, this is another spot where actually this is John writing his own thing. This is not necessarily a stitched together construction of references to other apocalyptic literature or scripture. He's pushing, to pardon the pun, pushing the boat out a little bit and kind of asserting his own opinion. So we have fallen is Babylon the Great. And then I'm glad, Susan, for you, I'm pretty sure those are not ravens. Those look like terrible little crows. They were nasty little birds that were sitting on that little illustration. So we've got unclean spirits. So we're introducing a new theme that's actually going to show up a little bit later about kind of who lives outside the city, who lives now in this place of disorder. And it's bad people, it's naughty people, it's demons, it's unclean spirits, and it's dirty birds. That's who lives there. So we're back with the wine of the wrath of her fornication. We get that again. And when we have two groups of people that come out as kind of key groups, kings of the earth and the merchants of the earth. But before we talk about them, here we get to what are we supposed to do about all this? Everything is going wrong. Things are breaking. There's stars falling down. There's beasts everywhere. So what are we supposed to do? And the answer is come out of her. Or one might also say exodus, called to leave the place of bondage and enslavement into the place of freedom. Have no part in her sins. So we talked about early on that there are these different sort of approaches to kind of Christianity. There were different sort of Christianities floating around. And one of the kind of axes around which there was tension is to what extent do you accommodate empire? To what extent do you withdraw from empire? And here's the big thesis. He's saying you have nothing to do with this. You need to pull away. Any association with this is fundamentally corrupting. And if you pull away, that itself will be an indictment of empire itself, and that will pay her back with her own coin. It's make her feel terrible about it. And then again, this kind of beautiful little piece is kind of sitting deep within the poetry, where you've got where now the harlot, who, despite about 15 verses ago having been torn apart and devoured by the kings, is now back and seems to be fine. Talking to herself, I'm a queen, no widow am I. No mourning will I see. So I think there's also, within the context of what he's trying to do, he's saying not only does empire devour itself, empire deludes itself. Empire lies to itself in order to make itself feel good. And because of this self-delusion, God's going to extra smite her when the plagues come. The real bad plagues, which we're not going to have time to do, those are the bowls. This next section is a really, really famous section of the Book of Revelation. It's called, sort of more broadly, it's called the Merchant's Lament. But it's divided into three pieces. The first is the kings. They weep, they wail as they watch the smoke. And they say, alas, alas, the great city, mighty city of Babylon, in 1 hour your doom has come. So we've had all of these different time frames. We've gotten times and months and 1,260 days, these sort of broad spaces of time. So I think it's reasonable to say that when they're saying like in 1 hour, this is kind of the in an instant, like boom, it's all gone, all falls apart. So if these are kings, one can assume that they have power. So there's this thing that's sort of frightening. If the most powerful thing out there can collapse in 1 hour, what could happen to me? But the really creepy one is this next one. It's the merchants. They will weep and mourn for her. Why are they weeping and mourning? Not because everybody died, not because this horrible thing happened, because no one buys their stuff anymore. It was naughty. I heard that. Okay, and then this amazing catalog of stuff. And almost all of it are luxury goods. But you get to the end, and he says, and fine flour and wheat. Now, if we go back all the way to our 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, remember there was a spike in grain prices, but he said, don't mess with the oil and with the wine. Now we've got problems with oil and wine and marble and iron and cinnamon and all this sort of stuff. So things are getting worse as we're going along. So things are really, really bad. There was something that actually just occurred to me as I was listening to the reading. If our supposition that John may have actually either spent a long time in Judea or was himself Judean, it's not at all implausible that he would have known people who were enslaved by the emperor's brother. So Titus was the one who led the big campaign against the Judeans and brought back all the treasures of the temple and brought back an enormous number of slaves. So in the late 1st century, Rome is very much a slave economy. It runs on a constant infusion of slaves that are typically acquired through military conquest. The Arch of Titus, again, kind of very famously, has images of these processions of Jews who had been shackled, who were brought into Rome in order to beef up the supply of slaves in Rome. So I think, when he gets to this point about slaves and human livestock, it's certainly, in the society around him, there would have been tons of people who were enslaved, but this may have actually been have touched him a little bit more deeply. The fruit for which you long for is gone from you, and all your luxuries and splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. And then we have a third one, the sea captains, sailors, and seafarers. Again, very, very much echoes the same sort of themes of the merchants, but I think it's interesting that he highlights this because it shows a sensitivity to the importance of shipping. He gets how the economy of Rome works. It works by shipping. When we talked about the grain and the wine back in the Four Horsemen, that again, if he's smart, and John appears to be quite smart, he probably knows that Egypt is the place where all of the grain is being produced. There are massive grain ships that are shipped from Alexandria to Rome, and if there's any disruption in those grain shipments, the imperial system could collapse. So he's very aware of how the broader web of economic activity operates. So what we get here is, come out of her, my people, a call to separation, a new exodus. And this separation is not just spiritual, it's political and economic as well. That's just about everything I have for today. So I want to stop here and see if folks have questions before I have one last slide before we wrap up. Reactions?
Venezuela?
George said Venezuela. Yeah, I mean, late first century empire's doing great. It's got the Flavians kind of put things into pretty good shape. We're not too far away from, I think it's the good emperors are coming up soon. So I mean, doesn't see economic collapse on the horizon, but boy, does he wish for it.
I was just thinking it would be hard for those 7 churches to exit the economy and the political environment because, as we discussed, they're pretty successful.
Some of them are. Some of them are not. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That now that we've gotten to this point and we sort of see how he's laying out the indictment and what the call is to Christians, it changes the focus of what Jesus said at the beginning. So you can kind of see how he. Hopefully, I've got you guys convinced that he's the best author in the New Testament, because he's laying the breadcrumbs. I mean, he's given the Easter eggs and paying them all off at the end. Anyone from Zoom who's got thoughts or comments?
I can't figure out how this John wrote Gospel John.
Absolutely did not. You
Okay.
missed that one where we talked about.
Yes, I did.
There's definitely 2.
Okay, but this John comes after Gospel John.
Yes.
So in theory, Gospel John and Mary are in Ephesus, and this John then's in Patmos a couple of years afterwards?
You are conflating lots of pious opinions.
Yes, I'm trying to now unpack what is clearly a hodgepodge of very interesting opinions that don't seem to wind up with any kind of deep ground to land on.
Let's, if it's all right with you, let's maybe talk offline after morning prayer, because there's a slide I can show you to show you how it all fits together.
Okay, great, fine, good. That's another incentive for all of you to come to morning prayer, 7 o'clock. We generally have some wonderful theological discussions about like who's going to be bishop and, what's going on. And it's generally got a wide range.
Would you mention again, please, the time frame when he's on Patmos writing these churches?
Oops. We don't know the time frame when he's on Patmos. All we can really, again, it's remarkable how specific we can get, but we don't know anything about before or anything after. We're almost entirely sure that he's writing in one of the last 2 years of, or one of the last 2 to 3 years of the reign of the Emperor Domitian. So he's writing in either 94, 95, or 96. Probably 95. Again, pretty much any other New Testament text, we're giving it. I mean, the Pauline text, the authentic Pauline text, we have pretty tight timelines. Most of them are still within 5 years. So this is the most precisely dated of any of the New Testament texts.
Oh, thank you.
Michael, Steve Peters.
Yeah, Steve.
The whole topic here is fierce words for the frightened people. In your view, what are they frightened of?
They are, well, first of all, it's a bad title. I would have done a different title if I had gotten this far. But what they're frightened of is they're frightened of losing themselves against Christians they believe to be wishy-washy and an empire that seems to want to take away their allegiance to God. So it's sort of an emotional existential crisis for them coming out of how they're engaging with the society around them, and also the pressure that they're getting from other Christians saying, no, go ahead and have the steak, it's fine.
Yes, the irony is, if you go out 200 years from this, the legions were filled with Christian soldiers and helped spread the word all over the empire. And the irony of it all.
You're not, actually, we just did St. Sebastian. We could be even earlier than that.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Okay. So stuff that we just aren't able to get to. So I just want to talk about these things just unbelievably briefly. Feel free to go back to your Revelation that you have in your handouts. Use your toolbox. You guys can decode most of this too. The 7 thunders are super weird. So there's another set of 7 things that happen, but we don't know what they are. So this angel shows up and shouts 7 thunders, and then John is told, do not write them down. Most of the scholarship says that this is a sign that there was other bad things that God was going to do, but then God said, no, I'm not going to be that mean. That actually I don't find that argument compelling at all. The language around what he says is, what the voice says to John is, seal up what the 7 thunders said, and do not write them down. That's much more in keeping with other kind of tropes of apocalyptic literature around seal this up until the right time. So I think, if anything, John's leaving himself some space for sort of other things happening that are not written down. Something else that we're not able to get to is the little scroll. So there's a point where yet another even bigger and scarier angel. They always get bigger and scarier every time you get a new angel. There's a little scroll, and he's told to eat it, and it tastes like honey in his mouth, but it turns his stomach. I think what the little scroll is baffled people. The best interpretation that I saw is that if we think about this thing as the kind of the wheel turning over and over again, the little scroll is actually the first scroll, the one with the 7 seals. So whenever we see the scroll, it's God's plan. And so he eats the little scroll. So he takes the little scroll into himself, and it seems good, but it's real hard to digest. And I think that's a very fair interpretation of the entire book of Revelation.
Yes.
We also have, there's the 2 witnesses. So at one point, these 2 witnesses show up. They're given certain power. Like the beast is doing beastie things. The witnesses show up and they're all yelling at people and getting them to repent, but then they don't repent, but some of them do repent. And then they kill the 2 witnesses, and the baddies are all like, we killed your witnesses. And then shock of shocks, about 3.5 days later, the two witnesses are raised from the dead and taken up into heaven. No one has any idea who the two witnesses are. The two best that are out there, one that immediately came to my mind is, oh, well, one's Moses and one's Elijah. That could work. I just came across something today who said it's Enoch and Elijah, which I was like, oh, that would make a lot of sense too. But the truth is, he absolutely doesn't say who they are. They also refer to as there are two lampstands and two olive trees, and those are references to the prophets. But again, no idea who the witnesses are. Another couple of issues, absolutely no idea who the 10 kings are. Just know, I mean, we could say kings, there's 10 of them, so that means all of them. Another giant problem, those 7 hills, which are also 7 kings, absolutely no idea which emperors he's talking about. No one can figure it out. The issue is that you got the year of the 4 emperors coming in the middle of that. So that messes up the numbering system. Just none of it makes any sense. So he may have had some in mind, but historically they're detached from us. We get some more action from those 144,000. We met them a while ago. At this point, they reappear, and they're back in white. They're looking a little bit more army-like than they were before, and they're described as having not defiled themselves with women. This is one of the lines in Revelation that can kind of makes particularly modern Western audiences get a little bit uncomfortable about what exactly is he talking about. Again, can't say for sure. But I would say with a pretty high degree of confidence that he's making references back to ritual law about the army in the Old Testament, which would often refrain from sexual relations in order to maintain ritual purity, in order to be the best army that God had. We see that in the story of David, who's got eyes for Bathsheba. Uriah comes back. He says, "Oh, go visit your wife." Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. He's like, "No, I'm not going to do that." So that's the kind of stories that he's relying on. There's an image that we've skipped over as the Son of Man as a reaper, as a reaping in the good grain, and then he sends out an angel to bring in the weeds. Again, when you look at the key for you, Susan, actually, and we'll talk about this, is in the handouts. There's a page that does the chronology of the writing. So, there's lots of stories of Jesus talking about the angels at the end of time coming to reap. The Son of Man is the reaper. So either John's pulling from a common tradition or, again, is in dialogue with those texts. So, again, unfortunately, can't cover all this stuff. It's too much fun, too wild, and good fun. Do you have the microphone? Yeah, Stephanie.
Yep. Thank you. My sense of biblical history is nil, so maybe this is obvious to everyone, but Babylon's the one who sacked Jerusalem, so is that why he's picking Babylon out to be the big bad guy?
Original Babylon, so OG Babylon, sacks Jerusalem, takes off it carries off, actually enslaves the upper classes of Judean society, and takes them off to Babylon, hence Babylonian captivity.
So Babylon is the worst of the worst.
Babylon's real bad. It's real bad, but specifically real bad and destroying Jerusalem. So Egypt is also bad. Sodom's bad. So at one point in one of these passages, one of the cities is described. They talk about, I think it is with regard to the Lamb. They talk about the city. They talk about the city where the Lamb was killed, which is Egypt and Sodom. Again, we have to recognize these are metaphors. So none of this makes any sense. They're being squashed together, and we're forced to interpret them together. So you might think, okay, well, the city where the Lamb was killed, that's Jerusalem. So is he referring to Jerusalem as Egypt and Sodom, which would be a little bit odd. But what's a little bit easier to understand is if empire kills the Lamb, then the city, which is Egypt and Sodom, becomes Rome as well. So it's very slippery in terms of what these things are. I think again that particular interpretation of that particular passage, I think he's talking about Rome, because Jerusalem's pretty beat up, and again there's the evidence in the text in terms of what John's relationship to the Judean communities are I think is really, really unclear.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? All right, next week we're going to do, probably another text-heavy day, a lot like today. We're going to look at, I think we're going to finally get a cosmic battle. We're going to have some lake of fire and some second death, and we're going to close out with New Jerusalem and some happiness.
Some happiness?
All right. Have a yes. Oh, good question. Let me just look at this. Do like, so if you could skim through, let's just say like 17 to the end. So 5 chapters. All right, see you guys next week.